Hello and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 102, Friday, May 10th, 2024.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and...
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined as always by the Trixie to my Big Al, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hello, listeners. Clap your hands and stomp your feet and try to keep right with them. We've got authors talking with us today, and they've got some real old country rhythm.
Today, we're pleased to welcome not one, but two authors to our latest interview. Husband and wife team Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer recently released Disneyland on the Mountain, Walt and the Environmentalists, the ski resort that never was, which will be our discussion focus today. Greg is a longtime writer and journalist for numerous magazines and newspapers, including the Denver Post, 5280, and the Boulder Daily Camera, where he has worked for 10 years as arts and entertainment reporter and editor. Kathryn is a Denver-based writer and journalist whose work has appeared in numerous publications, including Health Observer, Business Insider, and Pop Sugar. She primarily writes about business and has appeared on radio, TV, and podcasts as an industry expert. Welcome, Greg and Kathryn.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited.
Very excited to talk with you.
We were really excited to get your book. And before we start talking about it, we want to know how your passions for writing and journalism have this intersectionality with Disney. How did we arrive at a Disney book as your first book?
Oh my gosh. Well, so I especially definitely grew up with Disney. So definitely describe myself as a Disney person. Certainly grew up going to the parks from when I was very young. I grew up in New Jersey, so we would go to Walt Disney World. And so sorry, Disneyland people. But that's kind of where I spent most of my vacations growing up. And then when Greg and I got together, I kind of introduced him more or less to Disney, kind of brought him into the fold. And the two of us were both journalists, and we met at work, writing. And so I think this whole Disney book thing was just a very natural thing. Disney was a big part of our relationship, and writing was certainly also another big part of our relationship. And it is so thrilling, I think, especially for me, that my first, hopefully not last book, my first book is all about Disney and about this really interesting part of Disney history that a lot of people don't know about. It's so exciting that we get to tell this story that, again, a lot of people aren't really aware of. So it was kind of this natural progression. It really stemmed from this place of, wow, I can't believe, XYZ happened with the ski resort that never was, and us really learning about it. And then as we were learning about it and becoming basically obsessed with this story, saying to ourselves, oh my gosh, this would actually be a really interesting book. Let's try to write about it.
Couple goals for sure, coming together, writing a book, so much fun. I think Emily and I both relate in terms of being the Walt Disney World girlies who grew up visiting. Emily is also from New Jersey, and I'm
from Jersey,
from
Nice.
Maryland. And now we have partners who have, I would say, lovingly embraced the theme parks, but we're like Greg and maybe didn't have that initial affinity.
Yeah, I have the affinity now, yes.
Perfect. Well, yes, you wrote a whole book, so I would hope so.
If I wasn't before.
Yes, now you're in it. We'd love to know, when was the first time you had heard of Disney's Mineral King venture? We really feel like this is something that's kind of glossed over in Disney history. Emily and I were trying to remember, like, we were both aware of it. Like, had we heard it in Bob Thomas's biography of Walt Disney or like a Don Hahn book? Like, it was really just a blip if we had. So it was great to go in depth, and we'd love to know where it originated for you.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things that you read about in pretty much most biographies will have a little mention of it because it happened really right close to when Walt unfortunately passed away. But for us, I think we maybe, I don't even know, honestly, we probably read little mentions of it here and there, but it really started when we were at the Walt Disney Family Museum. It was 2018 on a trip to San Francisco. And in the museum is a big timeline of Walt's life, which has obviously millions of points on it with all the things that he did. But there were two, I think, two separate mentions of this ski resort in like 65, 66, which was interesting. And it also mentioned one of his partners on this project, who was a guy named Willie Schaeffler. And that's a name we recognize because he was from Colorado. He was a famous ski coach here, a famous skier, and he was actually the ski coach at the University of Denver, which is where we met. We met working in communications at University of Denver, and that's where Kathryn went to school. So that was really what got us like, how weird. Like there's this name we've heard of, Willie Schaeffler, and somehow intersects with Disney and a ski resort. And we just started looking more into it and then found out, there's this big environmental battle, a Supreme Court case, all these things, and kind of thought, surely someone's written a book on this because it's so interesting. But then come to find out that no one had. So that was really where it all started. It wasn't really that we were like, we should write a book, let's find a good topic. It was really just finding out about this and uncovering all the layers of the story and just thinking, boy, if no one else has done it, we should try because it's such an interesting story.
And I think that's what intrigued Courtney and I when you reached out to us, because exactly, we haven't seen a whole book just dedicated to this. And like you said, a lot of people are often surprised to learn about a ski resort, but in the first couple of chapters of your book, you make a good case that is it really all that surprising that Walt wanted to get into a recreation resort, not a theme park resort, but more recreation.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think too, because this was all happening starting really in about 1960 was when the seeds were sown for Walt when he worked on the 1960 Winter Olympics. So it would have been really only the second project like this from Disney. So, it's easy to think about, oh, they're just all about theme parks because they did Disneyland and then 16 years later they did Walt Disney World. But there was this possibility of this other project happening, which maybe at the time wouldn't have seemed as strange because there was really, that would have just been the second project and that would have been it. So, but yeah, we talk a lot in the book also about Walt was a skier. He really enjoyed the sport. He was a big conservationist and outdoorsman, and some of his love for wildlife and natural beauty and things like that would have played into this resort as well. So, on the face of it, it's Disney, a ski resort, but like, yeah, as you said, it's like once we started finding out this background, it really actually made sense.
And especially with his work with the True Life Adventures as well. That's something I really hope more of those will someday make it to Disney Plus. But I think that's also something that people often forget is that he did a lot of documentaries. And we see that I think the newest one is Tigers that's coming from Disney this year for Earth Day. Recently.
Combination.
Yeah, Nat Geo. But I feel like, again, people think this is so new that Disney, like, oh, they have Nat Geo, but it's really ingrained in the Disney history and the interests of the company since the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the True Life Adventure series was a really fun thing for us to find out more about, again, knowing a little bit about it and then really kind of understanding it obviously a lot more, and certainly in this concept of how this really fits into what Walt really liked and was passionate about. And so the True Life Adventure series, he started, I think it was 1948 to 1960. And he was all about basically just trying to educate people about all these kind of remote areas all over the world and trying to educate people about animals and wildlife. And he was so passionate about it. He actually had said, I think we noted in our book at one point, but he said it was the most fun he ever had making movies. So, I mean, when you compare that statement and then think about Snow White, like he actually had more fun creating these wildlife documentaries than he did all these amazing animated films. And I think that really speaks to what he certainly cared about. And one of the big ironies of this, he was actually lauded by a lot of different wildlife groups. And these conservation groups, including the Sierra Club, who then later basically tried to stop this ski resort from being built. But Walt Disney was awarded all these kind of accolades from these groups for being this great friend to nature and conservation because of those films. And then later it kind of turned into, people thought he didn't care about the environment and didn't care about it, but he actually obviously had all this to back it up. He really did care about it.
Yeah, I think that's a common dichotomy with Walt, where people was like, oh, Walt was this or that, but then there's so much evidence out there that is to the contrary. And speaking of evidence, one thing that we like to do on this show is pull back the curtain into the research, the writing process. And this was a very well-researched book, though I shouldn't be surprised with both of you being journalists. But your bibliography spans a wide range from Disney history texts we're familiar with, like Bob Thomas's Walt Disney, An American Original. We even caught our late friend of the show, Jim Corcus, in there, to environmental texts like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and government-centered texts from Mineral King and all these Forest Service meetings. So how did you find the range of sources you needed to tell the story of Disney's unrealized ski resort? We really like to just get into the process.
Yeah, it was a huge hunt. I mean, both of us have done, some research before on other like journalistic projects, but nothing like what this was. It was really a rabbit hole. And especially because there were, like you said, there were two sides to it. So we were looking at Disney history. There's a great online repository of Disney annual reports that was a nice source of things. We were able to find Buzz Price's initial sort of environmental and economic perspectives for this whole thing that lays out kind of what the project would look like. We talked to some people from Disney and on the environmental side, and then we found great repositories of Sierra Club documents and government documents, like you said, things about Mineral King. So it was really interesting to go through the two sides of this. There was a woman named Jean Koch that we write about in our book who was a Mineral King cabin owner. So she owned a cabin in the area where this was going to be built. And she was really a crusader against the project. And she saved all of her letters, all of the press clippings, tons of documents and things like that, and donated them all to USC. So we actually went out, we live in Colorado, we went out to California a few years back and spent a couple days at that archive just looking through all of those letters and all those things, which was a good start as well. But definitely one of those things where every name you came across led to another name, or every, story mentioned another story, and it just kept kind of snowballing. But we really were able to find a lot of great sort of contemporaneous documents of the time, newspaper articles, magazine articles, of what was happening at the time, as well as things kind of looking back at it.
Yeah, and we were a little nervous at the beginning, knowing obviously that this happened so many decades ago, and knowing that obviously a lot of the major players, of course, like people like Walt and Roy and stuff like that, have been deceased for so long. And we were like, is anyone even around? Because then even at the time, some of these people were, in their 50s, later in life. So we were a little worried about that, but we surprisingly found a handful of people that were vital to the story and are still living, and were, even more luckily for us, were willing to talk to us about this. So that was always exciting when we would get the response and people would say, sure, I'll be happy to talk, because you always get worried at that point in the research, if and when we're gonna get a hold of people who were the big characters of that story.
It's always so much fun as historians and researchers to like get into the documents, but it's always so much better when you actually have someone you can talk to and get those oral histories, and especially before passing, and especially before, like we said, this is a topic that not a lot of amateur Disney historians tend to talk about. So having those stories actually recorded now where maybe they weren't before is incredibly valuable and really exciting part of your book.
Thanks. Yeah, we definitely, I mean, obviously we're holding on to the audio files and everything so that they're around, because a lot of these people were up there in age. Even Jean Koch, we mentioned, she unfortunately died last April, but we were able to communicate with her some before that. And she really had a great memory and really shared a lot of things from her side. But then people on the Disney side as well that we're able to to share.
Yeah, it actually reached out to my parents and said, like, you were alive in the 60s and 70s. You were, do you remember any of this, seeing this in the news? And they were like, no, they were 8. They,
Yeah.
they were probably not paying attention to that very much.
Say, I equate it to us being alive for Disney's America, but not really.
Yeah,
The
Yeah.
other unbuilt.
I think if
Disney.
people lived in California, maybe they had heard
Yeah.
about it some, but if not, it's even though it did make some national news, but not too much.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Obviously, I wonder what kind of press it would have now if it was happening. And now we're getting more information spreads quicker and easier. So it'd be
And
interesting.
having platforms like social media that
Exactly. So it would be really interesting to know if this was happening right now. It's I mean, I kind of almost liken at least the controversy to some of the controversy that was happening in Florida recently with Disney and that kind of political battle.
I think there's a sequel there with the whole Disney's America and Virginia, if you're up for it. Like lots of parallels.
You're not the first person to mention that, and it is something that we are, thinking about potentially.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely very similar, very interesting.
So with your research, I have to ask because I'm an archives nerd. Did you do anything with National Archives? I'm a tour guide at the National Archives in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
So I always like to, when I saw like all these government documents, and you're talking about all the court cases, I'm like, I know where those are housed. I know where those things are. So curious if you used any online resources or did you do any traveling out to the regional offices?
We did not. No, sorry.
Online.
Okay. So much stuff is available online,
Yeah,
which is
we
great.
found some stuff online. I don't know. It's hard to even remember like where the original sources came from. Certainly possible that they came from there. Honestly, I'd have to go back and look. But I mean, any archive like that we had the university archives, library archive. I'm sure we must have come across some stuff from that.
Yeah, lots of stuff gets like managed between multiple places. But as soon as there was a Supreme Court case, I was like, that's definitely somewhere in the National Archives holding.
It definitely had to be.
Yeah, I think that might have come from there.
It's probably digitized. They prioritize Supreme Court cases, especially for like things to be available or to cross over things. Sorry, I had a geek out moment where I was like, I have to ask.
We even came across audio of the Supreme Court case.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's cool.
It's crazy. I mean, there's literally audio of the arguments, which is
I try to get my students, I teach government and politics, and when a court case is happening, like during the school day, I'll pull it up. But because there's no cameras, it is all audio. And to a 15-year-old, they're just like not interested. And I'm sitting there like completely enraptured, like listening to these arguments. And they're like, no.
That's hilarious. Well, Emily, now we know who we're going to bother when we need to access those archives. Now we have you as our contact. So.
So thinking more about your writing, we've done some research now. It's time to write. What are the benefits and challenges of being co-authors on a book?
Yeah, and then being co-authors, and then of course being a married couple, which
whole another layer.
a whole other layer. We keep joking that I feel like one of the first things that we say is if someone doesn't know us and we say, "Oh, we're a couple and we wrote this together," and then and then we're like, "Oh, we're still married." Like people's like worried faces kind of look at us. We're like, "We did it." It was really cool, actually. I think we have like a similar writing style and we had similar goals. I mean, they kept evolving, I think, during the writing process, but once we were on the same page, pardon the pun here, but it kind of made that a little easier. And I think it made for a better book because, it wasn't just one person kind of looking at it and writing something and that was it. The other person kind of swooped in and said, "Oh, let's add a little bit more, scene and color, and let's try to get some direct dialogue from the moment and some kind of like magic moments or whatever we did." So I think it made for a better book, and well, at least hopefully. But it was really interesting. I think it was really rewarding. We did it at a time like a lot of like we really got serious about this. I mean, this was a few years certainly in the making, and we had talked about this and started doing a lot of the research as far back as it, 2018 or something like that? But we got like very serious about it in 2020, 2021. So this was obviously, when the introduction of COVID, we didn't have a lot else to do. So we're like, okay, we got to be really serious about this. But yeah, I mean, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think working on it together and living together, especially during COVID, it was like, we say like there's probably a lot of co-writers out there that like, okay, we'll have our Zoom meeting once a week and we'll work on our own stuff, whatever. I mean, we were like walking our dog and talking about the book or eating dinner and like having ideas. So it's like it was cool because we were sort of like living it to some extent the whole time. So it was really on our mind. And I think we were able to collaborate on it more easily and quickly that way. So it was fun and it really, you might think it would cause a lot of, problems or conflicts, but it was really, as Kathryn said, it was really easy and fun, and it was just really something nice to focus our creative energies on at a time when there wasn't really a lot else going on. So
No, that's really great to hear. I think you are the first co-authors that we've had a chance to speak to, and having that added dynamic of being married is very interesting to hear. The other, I promise we'll get into the content of the book itself, but we love behind the curtain elements. The other part I wanted to get into was publishing. Certainly wondering how publishing a book is different from your previous published work. And also, I just wanted to shout out your publisher, Roman and Littlefield, because we often have like theme park press or the Disney press books. This is, I think, maybe a smaller known publisher, but I am from the University of Maryland, and the English department pipeline to Roman and Littlefield was very strong because their headquarters are in Maryland. So I just happened to recognize the name. It was very common for people to do internships there. And I was like, oh, I've heard of that, but I didn't expect them to do a Disney book. So just anything you'd love to share about the publishing process would be a delight as well.
yeah. Well, we came into this super cold, not really knowing anything about publishing. So Robert Littlefield, yeah, they have a huge amount of books. So they do like real academic books, very like general interest pop culture books. So we were sort of lucky to get with them and get into sort of more on the pop cultural general side. But we just really started probably a little too early in the process, to be honest. Started querying agents maybe before we really had like a super solid idea of what we were doing. But we were just so excited about it. So just really querying agents, and we were lucky enough to finally find someone who really like got it and thought it was a cool project and believed in it. And then she shopped it out to publishers, and Roman and Littlefield took it. So it was kind of just, your very typical publishing story, but it took a long time, and it really took people to understand. I mean, a lot of people said like, oh, maybe this would be a good magazine article. Maybe this would be a good podcast. Like it was hard to sort of communicate that there was such a big story to it. So it took sort of people, the agent side and the publisher side, for someone to sort of understand that there was more to it and kind of this big story to it. But that was really our process. I mean, it's making it sound super easy, but it took a long time, and there was a lot of queries and emails and back and forth, and and rewriting and trying to solidify our pitch and rewrite our proposal and a lot of stuff like that. So it took a long time, but we were like,
the idea of something taking a long time and having not a lot of people understand it feels rather familiar to the subject of the book, but luckily you succeeded. Unfortunately, Walt's dream does not come to fruition. I think you do a good job of showcasing the many sides of this, a lot of the process that it went through, but you could kind of give like a little thesis statement. Ultimately, why do you feel that the Mineral King project didn't come to fruition?
I would say, if I said it very succinctly, I would say it came at the wrong time. It was just a bad time. I mean, not bad time in America's history. I mean, bad time for Disney to be like, oh, this is what we want to do. This is a great idea. And then suddenly we were having so much discussion about environmental rights and should all these areas be developed, and what about protecting it? And so people were just getting really vocal about and nervous about certain places, especially places that a lot of people thought were very beautiful, should be kept open. And worried about, especially a company like Disney. I don't think it had the same connotations as it does today, in the sense of this behemoth, they do so much. But it was just it was the 60s, it was the 70s. We're having a lot of conversations about this, and the environmental movement was really coming up strong. And I think that this Disney resort was a really good place that people kind of decided to become vocal about. It was just a very just a very strong example, I think, of the time. And that's what I would say. It was certainly a combination of things. And a lot of people, when they are talking about Mineral King, I think the first thing that they think of, Walt Disney dies, and that's why it didn't happen. And I think that that certainly plays into it, and we write about this quite a bit. But I would say those combination of things.
I think something that plays into that narrative where people think he died and then it was just over was like I didn't know this went to the Supreme Court, but Disney's name itself is not in the Supreme Court title. It's what, Sierra Club versus Morton? Is that what it
Yeah.
is?
Yeah.
Uh,
Versus the interior. Yeah.
yeah, so when Disney's name is not directly linked to the court case name, like it's in the brief, like if you actually read it, it'll say the Walt Disney Company, but not being in the title, I think it's very easy to kind of think it all ended in 1966 when it went until
That's what I
1978.
assumed. Yeah, I was like, oh, we're still going. We got more chapters here to read.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the story really picks up after Walt Disney's death, which is, I think, one of the most interesting parts about it. I think the environmental movement certainly comes on even stronger after that. And one of the interesting things, too, that we write quite a bit about was how the Disney company thought of this project after Walt died, because Walt Disney was the one who really, really wanted this. And some people didn't quite understand, especially, for instance, Roy Disney, his brother, of course, wasn't super excited about it. However, one of the most interesting parts is that people like Roy and then later Card Walker, they really, really wanted to make this happen because it was so important to Walt. So instead of, even though some of them didn't necessarily maybe think this was like the best idea that Walt ever had, they really wanted to make this happen for his legacy, because it was one of the last things that he was trying to do. And I think that was one of the kind of most I don't know, sweet moments in a weird way of this story was how much some of these people really wanted it for Walt.
So something I wanted to kind of cycle back to, we had mentioned earlier that it seems natural that Walt should have gone into skiing and recreation with his background with environmental groups as well as the True Life Adventures. And I really liked how you phrased this in your book. This is in chapter 3. It says, quote, Mickey Mouse and Mineral King were akin to oil and water. They simply were two different consistencies that weren't meant to mix. Instead, they formed different layers, different ideas that would never blend, end quote. I thought that was really interesting because it seems like they should have. If you know Walt and the Sierra Club, you would think that they would mix. So I'm curious, like, where ultimately, even though Walt said over and over, my goal is to preserve as much of the beauty as possible, he had all these different plans. They won the Supreme Court case. They created a whole new plan with all the feedback from the Sierra Club, and yet it still didn't gel. Like, what do you think didn't mix between the two?
I mean, I think part of it, like Catherine said, was, and even though there wasn't the connotation of Disney at the time, that kind of negative connotation, I think there was that idea of like, I think even there was an editorial or something like, keep Mickey Mouse out of the mountains. Like, even though Walt said a million times, this is not going to be an amusement park, this is not going to be, a thing with Mickey Mouse running around, whatever, people still kind of had that connotation. It was hard for them to see past Disneyland and what that looked like and what happened to Anaheim after it was built, and really see beyond, that as far as Walt's vision for keeping everything really pure. But I mean, in terms of why it ultimately didn't happen, despite winning the Supreme Court case and all that, it got bogged down in so much process, and there's the Supreme Court case, and then the Sierra Club refiled their case. So every time there was a new legal case, the project got put on hold again. And then there was a law passed called the National Environmental Policy Act in the 1970 that required them to do this big environmental sort of look at what the possible repercussions were going to be, an environmental impact statement. And that took a long time to do. And I think, then they were starting to look at Epcot and things like that. So even though they still were paying lip service to, we want to do this for Walt, it really seemed like internally that they really kind of lost the passion for it, and maybe just, still had it on the back burner, but it just started to seem less and less likely as time went on, and as sort of those environmental things ramped up.
So thinking about where most people tend to see, like we said, when Walt passes, that's when people think that this dies out. Spoiler alert, everybody, Walt dies. We bring this up, I feel like every time we read a history book every time we read about Walt, the event of his death is always very emotional and very paramount and a climax to whatever history is being told in the Walt Disney Company. So how did you use this turning point when telling the story of Mineral King?
That's a great question. I think, yeah, I mean, we just saw it as such an integral part of this story. Obviously, it is for the Disney Company in general. I think you put Walt's death in, it's so vital to really any story that touches Disney. I mean, that goes without saying. But for this, it was like part of this dream dying with him. I mean, it was kind of this real sadness. And one of the goals that we tried to do with the book, and it did take us a little while, like for us to figure this out, was, yes, I am a Disney person. Yes, we're Disney people or Disney fans, but we did not we really wanted to tell this story from both perspectives and give both sides equal weight. And I think it was one of those moments where anyone on both sides would kind of be like, oh, well, that's kind of a sad moment for this story. But it was just such a pivotal point. And I think after that, things just really continued to change and I mean, for the worse, I mean, for the project in terms of momentum getting much stronger. And I think one of the things that we kind of make the argument in our book without explicitly saying it is, if Walt would have continued to be around during this, and especially as some of this controversy grew, what would have happened to this project? Because people really cared about him. In fact, we had talked to a few different people who were in that Mineral King, California area, who said, even though they weren't, for it, because they were worried about what would happen to their surrounding area, when Walt Disney came to the area, some of them as children, had signs. They were waving him in, like, welcome, Walt Disney. We are so excited to have you. And then maybe they changed their tune a little bit. But at the beginning, people were very, very excited about it. And I think that was in part because of Walt Disney. And then Walt Disney dies, and suddenly things really, really shift, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, sort of the pitch of the book in a way was, this is the final dream of Walt. He was working on a few things at the time, Walt Disney World and Cal Arts, and this really the three main ones. But this one really seems so personal to him and connected to his passions and things like that. And then, when he died, it's that part of it kind of went away. I mean, it was still a business thing they were trying to do, but it wasn't, I don't know that they saw it, that, Roy and people like that saw the dream part of it as much
Yeah,
as,
it's a
as
shame
Walt
that
would
it
have.
never does come to fruition, but I really liked how you touched on that some things like the roots of what this project were are found elsewhere currently in Disney. Do you feel like that eventually brings us more to like the non-Disney resort or non-Disney park experiences like Vero Beach, Alani, even Adventures by Disney, or some of your favorites that you touch on towards the end?
Yeah, Alani for sure. And I think even like something like the Grand Californian we talk about as bringing in sort of elements maybe of what that design might have looked like. But I think, yeah, just that idea of going beyond parks, going more into like the real world, the natural world. I think is a part of it. And really, working on projects like Alani in particular that are really sort of connected to the surroundings and embraced by the people. They worked hard, I think, on Alani to make sure that it really fit in culturally, that it fit in economically and things like that. Where with Mineral King, I think a lot of people felt like they were trying to just stick this into an area without getting a lot of input from the locals. So I think that's another kind of one of those lessons. But yeah, there's a lot of places in Disney where you see elements of things where we'll just say, oh, that could have been in Mineral King, whether it's, Grand Californian or what else.
Yeah, and a lot of things like with like national parks,
Yeah.
and them really focusing on those and some of the resorts in Florida and California. And even there is what is this?
In Paris,
In
right?
Paris, yeah, what is it?
Sierra Lodge or something like that.
Which seems like a big nod to Mineral King. So it's really interesting how those things have really lived on. And in that final chapter of the book, we talk about how it's kind of made some of those impressions for the Disney company, and skiing and everything else. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see that those things do certainly live on. And I feel like if Disney ever announced anything like that, it would just, I think a lot of people would be like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Especially now we're seeing, of course you have Disney Cruise Lines and Disney Adventures, like you said, and a lot of different kind of vacation stuff that doesn't have to do with that theme park. It does. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways.
You also had brought up in your book, Vail later in the 80s and 90s, how even though we didn't get Mineral King, a lot of other resorts did pay attention to how Disney just overall does hospitality, entertainment, and recreation. And when Vail was undergoing a big renovation, new people taking over a lot of those resorts, a new group had bought one of the big resorts. That they turned to Disney, and we even had Goofy go out there. So we got like kind of a Mineral King a little bit.
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
really interesting, especially because we're in Colorado, so Vail is just, up the road from us. So that was such an interesting find. Yeah, that they essentially, the new CEO knew about Mineral King. He had heard the stories and he got in touch with Disney and went to look at the plans. And then they ended up, as you said, sort of reinventing themselves as this family-friendly ski resort. They had costume characters skiing around. They developed these sort of themed ski through areas on the mountain. And then they had Goofy, Sport Goofy for a number of years was like sort of the mascot there, that they worked out this deal for him to appear outside the parks, which is pretty rare. So that was all super interesting to uncover.
And it really shows you, we mentioned, I think, I can't remember offhand what Vail was at one point. It was like near the bottom of ski resorts as far as like attendance and popularity and things like that before this. Then they did all the Disney vacation and embraced a lot of those Mineral King and Disney examples. And then within the next year after embracing this, they became the number one family and overall ski resort in the US. Yeah. So it really goes to show how successful something like this would have been to the Disney portfolio, you would think.
Well, something we did get from those original plans, which I love archive stuff, like they had all of that. They just save it all. Thanks, Disney. They didn't scrap the Country Bear Jamboree, Mark Davis's creation. I always thought this was so interesting because in my timeline before reading your book, I thought Country Bear Jamboree was because Mineral King closed. They're like, oh, we might as well put this attraction that we built somewhere. But it actually opened well before, because Mineral King never broke ground. So we did get the Country Bears in opening of Walt Disney World. From what research you've done, how did this translate when they originally were supposed to be these bears coming out of the sequoias and then we put them in Florida? Do you think that translated well, his original design and the intention of the show, to what ends up in Walt Disney World?
Yeah, I don't know that they ever really changed are there bears in Florida? Nobody knows.
There are. They show up.
Well, there you go.
Yes, there was
the
a story
Magic
like
Kingdom.
last year when the bear actually was in Florida. Come on, Greg.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so they didn't have to change anything. Just like, oh, they didn't come out of sequoias, they came out of the Everglades.
No, now they are reimagining
was
the Country Bears. I'm not sure if you heard that. They're gonna
I
sing
know.
some Disney songs. Do you feel like that's a natural progression? What's your take on it?
Yeah.
It's always sad. I mean, it's always a little sad, right?
Some of the original
That's
songs
true.
are pretty bizarre though, like Won't Whip Little Buford or whatever there's some blood on the saddle. Yeah, it might be time for a bit of
It's twofold.
a bit of a change up. But I mean, it is sad to lose anything that's like classic Disney, especially for like an opening day thing. It's sad to see it change. I hope it's not too
No,
modern.
I
Has that
believe
happened
it
yet, or
is
when is that
supposed to
supposed to
be
happen?
this year, though, from what the Disney Parks blog has said. But this is just, yeah,
It's
it
closed
definitely
now.
closed.
I remember seeing the
People
last
waited
weekend,
in
like big
line.
hurrah, where
Yeah,
all these people went to
Yeah.
that's
see it.
one.
Yeah.
So I guess they're
Yeah,
changing the
I'm probably
soundtrack
making,
then.
some reprogramming to the animations, but definitely when I imagine Kathryn, you grew up with it, and then I take my now husband to Disney, and he's like, "What is this? Like, was that you, Gray?"
That's so bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
he really
Yeah.
likes
I
it
like it
too.
though.
I do remember I feel like I can't admit this, but because now I feel like we have such an
Yeah,
affinity for Country Bear Jamboree, especially because of the book. But I remember when we were kids, my sibling, like my mom would be the person who'd be like, let's go see the Country Bear. And we'd all be like, okay, like this show again, like this, that was low on our list. But then, of course, when you get older, you have
agreed.
more of the affinity, I feel like,
Carousel
for a lot of
Progress,
those
all of
shows,
that.
for sure.
Do you have a favorite Country Bear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, Trixie, maybe. I'll go with
they're
I don't know that
so
I
hard
have
to
a
pick.
favorite. I like the MC. What's the guy's name that
Henry
has the little guy?
Ken.
Henry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
wouldn't
I
have
like
the show
Henry.
without him.
I
Henry
was
so
always a
cute.
fan of the sunbonnets.
We
Oh,
could
yeah, those are
declare it,
cute.
friends. We should do that as a Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party costume. Yes, Leanne, we're pitching this to you now if you're listening.
That
I
that's a
like that.
very good one.
Very.
I think what's good though is if reimagining it is what we need to keep the Country Bears relevant with attendance, that it's worth keeping the space, that we still have this legacy of Mineral King. I'm with you. Like, it's sad to lose the original show. And even the original show was what, like 16 minutes? And then
Yeah.
it's been cut down since.
Yeah.
And now we're getting a total reimagining. But overall, I'm like, well, if it means they still get to be there, I'll take
Even
it.
when you walk into that barn or the whole area where it all takes place, it all feels very like you could see how this would all fit into.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense for sure, I think.
Whenever we go, we kind of look around on the walls trying to really study. Like, are there any other little clues
Yeah,
here? Any other
I
little
wanted to
Easter eggs
touch
from
on
Mineral
the
King?
Easter eggs because I am definitely a lover of all things Disney Easter eggs and learned quite a few from yours. So were there any favorite Mineral King winks and nods that you want to preview for our readers? We don't have to give them all away.
One of the ones would be recently, and we finally got to see this in person not long ago, but was at Carousel Progress, which I love so much. So I was very excited about this because Carousel Progress is one of my favorite attractions. But in the final scene, the future scene, people can't see me doing the air quotes, but I am. In the last scene, which whatever they're trying to accomplish with that, the son is wearing a shirt, and he is wearing a shirt that has basically this emblem of what they had created for one of the restaurants and at the hotels at Mineral King. So it is like super one of the very deep cuts. I mean,
Super
people
geeky, yeah.
wouldn't even, unless you're very familiar, I don't think people would know this at all. But pretty incredible that it's been fun to see. I feel like because for a while this Mineral King thing was a little hush hush among Disney. I mean, Disney didn't seem to want to discuss it. I mean, obviously it is one of their failed projects, and more than that, because it had so much controversy attached to it, certainly. But I feel like now you're seeing a couple different nods to it in recent years, which has been really fun. Another thing, and I don't even think we were looking for it at this point, was when we were watching one of the new Mickey Mouse
The Wonderful
shows.
Winter or something.
Yeah, the Wonderful Winter. couple years back, a year back. I'm trying to remember when it was. And well, I guess we were still writing the book. And I don't think we found out about it. We just like happened to have it on. And we saw Mickey and friends going to Mineral King, California. And he was holding the sign, this brochure, and it said like Mineral King, and it had all of these nods. It actually had a nod to the Country Bear Jamboree because it had the heads of the buffalo and things like that on the wall. And I think both of our mouths were just kind of open. Like neither of us like talked to each
I
other. We're
picture
just
you
like,
as that Leonardo
what?
DiCaprio meme where he's like pointing at the TV as it comes out.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That was it. Yeah, like what?
And
Yeah,
that was
that
an
was
organic moment you were just watching for fun,
Yes.
and that
yeah.
just popped up.
Yeah, it was almost like, wait, rewind that. Like, what did that say?
Wait.
Did that say Mineral King? Are we
Because
dreaming?
yeah, I think for a little while we were watching random stuff. Like there has to be something in here. Like we watched, tell me if you guys have seen this ever or recently. Remember the Country Bear Jamboree
Yes.
movie? Like the
Yeah.
weird, like
Hard to
and
forget
It's been a long
that
time, but
Christopher
yes.
Walken
so
with his
weird.
armpit talent.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's wild. And we're watching things like that thinking, okay, there has to be some kind of a nod here.
What
And
was the live action ski movie? There was the skiing comedy like in the 70s where he,
which we also mentioned,
yeah,
didn't
I
we?
can't remember the name of it now.
Oh my gosh.
This guy, is it Dean Jones or someone that inherits a ski resort? And I think they actually filmed a lot of it at Crested Butte in Colorado. But there's one point where they mention a couple of like the names of like the Mineral King.
And that was filmed. I mean, that was
Snowball
That's
filmed.
actually a
Express.
fun movie.
Yeah, but that was filmed.
Snowball
I haven't
Yes.
seen
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one.
Oh my
I
God.
recommend
I'll have to
it.
add that one to my list, but definitely have maybe regretfully
I
seen
believe
the
it's on
live
Disney
action
Plus.
Country
Pretty
Bears.
sure.
I think
Yeah.
though, yeah, those kind of movies we were like searching. That was at the time like, oh, there has to be something here. And the Snowball Express had a very small mention of it. And I think it was because it was around the time when they were trying to build it. Sorry to tell everyone, Country Bear Jamboree, the movie, did not have any Mineral King. Yeah, so I'm so
Or much
sorry.
else going for it.
Yeah, for school
Unless-
students, that's not the
Unless
Spark Notes
someone really
version.
wants to watch it, because
Yeah.
man, oh man, is that funny in a bad way.
It is. It's so bad it's good.
It really
Exactly,
is.
yes.
But yeah, the Mickey Mouse one was natural.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Like you said, giving time to both sides. Kind of turning towards the Sierra Club to wrap up our conversation. Where does Mineral King now fit in today's conversations about conservation and environmental protection? I think that's something out of the book that I got the most legacy out of is how it completely transformed how we do national parks and building recreation spaces now.
Yeah, I mean, it was this timing thing where it really was, as Kathryn said, sort of this test case in the 60s for environmental stuff. And then when it went to the Supreme Court, it really kicked off this whole discussion about how these cases are looked at in the courts, who can kind of have what they call standing, legal standing. So who kind of has the authority to come in and advocate for a natural area, that kind of thing. There was, I mean, prior to this, it was sort of you had to really show how you were going to be personally or financially harmed by a development like this, rather than just to go in and sue purely on the basis of protecting its natural beauty. So we've had a few people tell us, like lawyers, like, oh, we studied this case in law school because it was kind of that big of a thing. So I think it really now, I mean, now it's part of, spoiler alert, it's part of Sequoia National Park. And so it's completely protected, and there's it's part of the John Krebs Wilderness. John Krebs was a congressman from California who figures in our book that really created the legislation that in the end put Mineral King into the park. But I think, it's almost become among environmental law people sort of this emblematic thing of, one of the things that helped to form modern environmental law and the way that we protect the environment and the way that we think about bringing these kind of
This was
cases.
such a great legacy to read about. So we're really appreciative of you, one, taking the time to write this, but also to come chat with us. Whenever we have authors on our show, there are two questions that we always like to ask. And the first is, what is a Disney book that you think we should add to our shelves, given your extensive research now?
I will give different answers. Mine's more boring only because I know for a fact that you've heard this answer. I think you just heard about it from someone a couple episodes ago, if I'm not mistaken. But Disney War by James. Man, I just think it's one of the best, I feel like, nonfiction books I feel like I've ever really read. I mean, that's again, obviously he's a fantastic journalist, the writer of this. He's New York Times columnist. He just like the level of detail that he wrote this was just absolutely incredible, and the access he had to Eisner and Frank Wells and everyone at the time. It was, I mean, it made for certainly an incredible read. But I always am certainly of the mindset of, of course I love old Disney history and anything to do with Walt, but I grew up, late 80s, early 90s, especially of that Disney Renaissance time period. So certainly excited about people like, growing up with Mike Eisner and knowing that this was a very crazy time period of Disney history. That would be mine.
I would say I was trying to think of all the millions of books that we looked at for our book when we had like literally shelves just piled up with books. One of the ones that was really really interesting. What it's called Walt's Revolution by the Numbers, and it's by Buzz Price. So Walt's Revolution by the Numbers. I don't know how easy it is to like get your hands on it. I think we got it through like library loan, but it's by Buzz Price, who is an economist that worked with Walt. He helped him find the land for Disneyland, and he helped a lot with Mineral King and other projects. Then he went on to work for other companies, kind of in the theme park vein. So it's a lot of kind of his interesting, logical sort of numbers mind, and a lot of his biography sort of woven into there, his thoughts about things, but a lot of just really interesting stuff with statistics and numbers and how they figured out certain things and certain calculations for Disney, and then also how he took that on into his other work and other companies. So that's one that we found really useful for our research, and it was just kind of a fun, interesting read that was a little different than your typical your
I'm a numbers girly. I'm ready. Thank you so much for those great recommendations.
And then we do always ask, what advice would you give aspiring writers or Disney historians what have you learned through this process?
I think I would say to really find a story that speaks to you, that you're really interested in. I think, you're probably not going to make millions of dollars writing a Disney book unless you're really lucky. So I think finding a topic that you're really personally interested in that really grabs you so that the research is enjoyable and it's fun to uncover this stuff. I think that really helped with us, that it was something that we were really, really passionate about and interested in, really helped throughout the whole writing process. So that'd be my advice, is just find a topic that you like.
Yeah. And obviously not give up on that too, because on that note, we know when publishers, when we got those rejections and they said, I don't think this is a book, or, can you try something else would you be interested in something else? And yeah, we just were so passionate about this that we just kept going with it. So,
Well, we're so glad that you did. Well, next up for our listeners is our annual tradition on the podcast. We are kicking off our next summer series in June. This year, it'll be our Adventureland Attractions summer series with a focus on Swiss Family Robinson, the Enchanted Tiki Room, and the Jungle Cruise. We'll kick things off first with the Swiss Family Robinson by Johann David Weiss, which inspired the Treehouse in Adventureland as well as the 1960s live-action film. In the meantime, you can keep up with Book of the Mouse Club on Instagram at Book of the Mouse, or email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. Please be sure to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast so others can find and read and listen along with us. You can keep up with me, Courtney, on Instagram at Great Gutsby.
And you can find me, Emily, on Instagram at Emily_McD. And Greg and Kathryn, where can readers keep up with you? And most importantly, where's the best place to buy your book?
well, we do have a website, DisneylandOnTheMountain.com. So that gives all kinds of links to where you can purchase the book. Certainly any online retailer, especially Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and of course, directly through our publisher, Rowman and Littlefield. And our website also has contacts for the two of us. So we would absolutely love to hear from anyone who would like to reach out.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, we will be sure to include all of that in our show notes so that our listeners can connect with you and find the book. We have one thing left here on Book of the Mouse Club, and that is to end with our closing quote. As our guest of honor, Kathryn, what have you picked for us?
This is a quote from Ray Bradbury, who I just love. And I think this really speaks to, obviously, your podcast with reading and writing. And of course, Ray Bradbury also has a big tie to Walt Disney as well, and has had some Disney parks ties. So Ray Bradbury said, "Just write every day of your life. Read intensely, then see what happens."
I love it. We think we've all taken that to heart in different ways here. And again, we're so grateful for the time that you've spent with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
guys. Yeah.
This was so fun. Really appreciate it.
Book of the Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.